All right, hey guys, this is your tired teacher back with another live stream for you. This is our live stream about the social changes of the American Revolution and also about the Articles of Confederation and the Constitution. So there's a couple loose ends that I wanted to bring up with the Revolution with you guys, and it specifically goes with the social changes post-American Revolution. So last time we had talked about, the American Revolution, the battles, the Treaty of Paris, and, pretty much that whole thing. But here's some things that change about society post-American Revolution. Now, remember, Loyalists were largely rich. I mean, let's face it, they were the aristocracy of the colonies. So, during the war, they had their land confiscated. And because of this confiscation of land and the large estates that they owned, essentially, what happened was that the aristocracy here lost influence, and therefore their, influence in the future government is going to be diminished as well. So, also during the Revolution, states were adopting this whole notion of the separation of church and state, which, they were starting to refuse to give financial support to religious institutions and whatnot. So this was quite the departure from what we saw earlier in colonial times. Now, Native Americans, how they are affected by the war, they are seen as the biggest losers of the Revolution, quite arguably, because seriously, they lose so much power and influence because of the outcome of the Revolution. The Iroquois Confederation had sided with the British, and, this is going to break them apart, essentially. So what once was a mighty confederation of native tribes is now, just their power is diminished. Now, with the Treaty of Paris, tribal lands as well have been, pretty much given away. The British weren't able to control those lands anymore and honor these treaties that they had with the native tribes, plus losing that British influence there out on the frontier to help protect the native tribal lands. People are just gonna straight up march on through and take them over. So, with African Americans, the Revolution is going to change lives for a few of them, specifically those living in the North. Now, people in the North are going to start viewing Thomas Jefferson's whole concept of, all men are created equal in the Revolution, in the Declaration of Independence. And so they start taking it to heart, and they're going to start freeing up slaves in various northern areas of America. In the South as well, there would be a few slave owners who would actually, give their slaves freedom. However, widespread was going to be slavery in the rest of the southern states. I mean, it's all already ingrained into their economic system, largely the labor force of the land at that time. So southern states are not going to readily give up their slaves, and it's going to lead to a big fight later on. So, for women, we do have social change for women post-revolution. Now, even though women contributed greatly to the war effort and helped keep this country going, what ends up happening to them post-revolution is that they don't gain those rights that they were hoping to get. Women largely remain second-class citizens in society who were confined by their gender roles and stereotypes going along with it. So women, however, are going to gain strides with education. Now, here's how. So, this movement called Republican motherhood is going to both uphold societal norms for gender, but it is also going to help propel women as far as educational opportunities. Now, here's how. There's this thought that women should raise good citizens of the Republic, and in doing so, ensure that their children are well versed in all things that make them good little Americans and well educated to boot. So here's how this works out for women. Women are going to push for the right to an education through this Republican motherhood. They say, after all, how can we educate our children to become good citizens of this republic if we ourselves are not educated? So women are going to start to get educated. It's going to be socially acceptable for women to gain a primary education. And the big winner out of this movement will be their daughters. Their daughters will be educated alongside their sons. And, this is going to lead to their daughters seizing that opportunity for education and pushing further for the expansion of women's rights in the future. We're talking about the fight for women's suffrage. We're talking about the fight for, property ownership for women, higher educational opportunities, and so on and so forth. So, in essence, this Republican motherhood gets the ball rolling for women's rights in the future. Now, let's go ahead and talk about our major topic in hand for today. Now that we've tied up the loose ends with the revolution, let's talk about the Articles of Confederation. And as we're going along with this, I want you guys to compare and contrast what we hear with the Articles to what we hear with the Constitution. So, the Articles of Confederation were already a governing document at the time of the Revolution. These articles were approved by the Second Continental Congress way back in 1777, at the height of the Revolution. So, this document is a very reactionary document, and here's what I'm trying to say with this. Now, okay, we were fighting against the British government, right? Against Parliament, against the King. So, Great Britain has a strong central government, Parliament being the legislative body. Now, the colonists saw Parliament as the truly oppressive body of that form of government, because Parliament, after all, was passing all of these acts, that were limiting the natural rights of the colonists here. So when they come up with their own style of government, they want the exact opposite of what they experienced with Great Britain. So we're talking about, instead of having a firm and strong central government, we're talking more like a confederation where the states hold the ultimate power. Now, this would be our lasting document, all throughout the 1780s, until we do have that Constitutional Convention in 1787. So, let's go ahead and talk about the structure of the Articles of Confederation. So what we have here is pretty much a unicameral legislature, which means they only have one house of Congress. And each state is going to have equal representation, which to large states like Virginia, their political voice with this one vote per state thing that we have with the Articles will be diminished. The people there, essentially the larger population, will have as much say-so as states with smaller populations, where you could argue that those people have more of a political say-so because of this. So the Articles, the problems don't stop there. They're only going to have that legislative branch. They're not going to have an executive or judicial branch. Hell, we don't even have a president of the United States at that time. We have the president of Congress. That's it. So really, these articles, instead of establishing a strong and more perfect union, are going to establish a firm league of friendship, where everybody's just in it together just for the common defense, not necessarily for the greater good. And we're going to see that problem rear its ugly head when we talk about Shays Rebellion in a minute. But essentially, seriously, the states had the ultimate authority. Yeah, sure, Congress could call up a navy and an army, but it had to ask the states for permission, Congress could declare war and enter foreign relations, but again, the states need to give their permission. So essentially it's kind of like this, guys. Like, let's bring a school analogy into this. So, really, what would school look like if the principals weren't in charge and it was the teachers? Okay? Now, in a perfect world, having the teachers in charge of a school would be a great thing, okay? Because they know the inner workings of it. However, there are so many differing attitudes at school amongst teachers that honestly, various departments, various factions would push for things that are important for them and not necessarily for the greater good. Now here's what I mean by that. So your math teachers might value different things than what your English teachers would value. Your science teachers might value different things than what your social studies teachers value. So therefore, we're going to see kind of like increased sectionalism and really just everyone for themselves kind of thing. So ultimately, this is going to be so problematic that really the weaknesses are just going to be the biggest factor of the articles and why they are so short-lived. Because check out these problems here. Congress doesn't have the power to collect taxes. Tax revenue is essential to running a country because that's how we get our money to pay for various programs and to just conduct government business. So if we're not pulling that money in, we are broke. And we were extremely broke during the Revolution because of this. We couldn't pay the Continental Army. We couldn't buy weapons and supply them and stuff. So that's why dude, the articles almost did us in during the Revolution. No joke. We almost lost this war because of these damn articles. Thankfully, we got, foreign allies and private citizens to step up and help finance the war, but really? Dude, these articles suck. So, another thing that's so terrible about the articles is that, they couldn't even regulate interstate trade. So states were arguing amongst themselves about when the hell to do. They couldn't come to agreements a lot of the times, and were charging various rates and stuff to each other. So really, this was kind of a disaster. Now, to pass any sort of law, you needed the consent of 9 out of the 13 states to even pass anything. And you need unanimous approval to amend anything within the Articles of Confederation. So essentially, this thing is a disaster waiting to happen. And okay, let's try to look at the bright side with this. The articles actually did do 3 things right. Yeah, 3. So let's go ahead and discuss them. Why not? Let's give a balanced review of the articles. So, thing number 1 they did right. The Treaty of Paris. The Treaty of Paris was successfully negotiated under the Articles of Confederation, and that officially ended the American Revolution. Okay? So, yeah, good thing number 1. Good. Good thing number 2. The Land Ordinance of 1785. Essentially, this shows us how to divide up, acreage of land in the territories, set aside land for churches and schools. Yeah, that's it. That's it. Alright. Thing number 3, though, is probably the most important thing that the Articles did right, which is the Northwest Ordinance of 1787. Now, this is going to formally set up how we admit states into the Union. So, territories need to align by these criteria. And once they reach a certain population within that territory, they could apply for statehood. So, essentially, that's the one good thing that coming out of these articles. Honestly, the states did it better with their own constitutions. states are drafting their own constitutions during the Revolution. I mean, Massachusetts being a prime example, as well as Virginia. They're going to define citizens' rights in a form of Bill of Rights in like the Virginia Constitution. And their constitutions, however, will include bicameral legislatures. Though in states like Massachusetts, New York, and Virginia, they are going to set up strict voting rights as well. So, meaning that they're going to add the property requirements to voting. And these are your more conservative states of the Union at this time. Now, the liberal states like New Hampshire and New Jersey are going to have the one-house legislature and pretty weak governors. However, they call for universal male suffrage, which means all white men, regardless of property, can vote. So, in essence, expanding democracy in their area. But honestly, guys, I mean, the articles have a whole bunch of problems going on with them, and we need to fix this. We need to just fix this. So, the first attempt to trying to smooth over the disputes between the states, especially with interstate trade and, well, the lack of regulations thereof, happens at Mount Vernon. So, at Mount Vernon, George Washington invites delegates from Virginia and Maryland to his home to discuss the articles, because Virginia and Maryland were arguing about all kinds of crap, like commerce and fishing and navigation, because, I mean, hello, the Chesapeake separates the two, and the Chesapeake is an important region at the time. So both states kind of agree at Mount Vernon that, you know what, yeah, these articles suck. We need to totally amend these things. But we need a bigger meeting about it to see if more states are involved, well, on board with this. So we meet up at Annapolis the following year, in 1786. So at the Annapolis Convention, we've got more states joining on. Alexander Hamilton's repping, New York. So at this conference, at this convention, what we ultimately decide is that, you know what, yeah, we need to convene a convention the following year with all the states involved this time so that we can amend these articles. And this convention is going to happen in Philadelphia. Meanwhile, during the winter that year in 1786 to 1787, we're going to have a rebellion that's really going to show us the weaknesses of the articles, just in case people didn't quite really see it clearly. It's going to be Shays Rebellion. So here's the deal. Here's some historical context with this. Okay, Shays Rebellion occurs in Massachusetts. Massachusetts, as we remember, is heavily involved in the Revolution. I mean, a lot of fighting happened in Massachusetts, therefore a lot of spending as well. So Massachusetts is broke, trying to pay back the debt that it owes to its private citizens for financing the war on their behalf. So, how do we raise money? We gotta raise taxes. Now, the taxes that were raised at this time would mainly be property taxes. So, who has the most property at this time? Farmers. Now, farmers are going to get hit extra hard with taxes, and there's an economic recession that ensues as well. So it's going to be really hard for them to pay off their mortgages on their farm. Now, since they can't pay those bills, debtors' courts are going to confiscate their property and send the farmers to prison. So it's like a double-edged sword right there. Now, the farmers are going to be like, hey, Massachusetts government, hook us up, man. Help us out with a stable paper currency so we could pay off this stuff, plus give us a little bit of the tax relief. We're losing our farms. The wealthier classes are like, no, Massachusetts government, you guys still owe us money, so keep the taxes. So in essence, Daniel Shay and a group of farmers are going to march on down and take over the debtors' court in down there, and they're going to also try to seize weapons from the Springfield Armory. Now, while they're occupying the debtor's court, I mean, dude, okay, here's what's ultimately wrong with this. And none of this stuff would happen nowadays, right? Like if angry farmers were to take over, a court now, it would be squashed so bad, right? The army would be there same freaking day, squash a rebellion. That does not happen under the Articles. It takes them weeks to get rid of Daniel Shay and his crew. This shows the weaknesses of the Articles. We couldn't even defend ourselves against angry farmers. How in the hell can we defend ourselves against foreign nations wanting to invade? Seriously. Under the Articles, the federal government couldn't even step in and squash this rebellion because none of the states gave a crap. They're like, that's a Massachusetts problem. We're not going to send our militias and our troops. So that is the problem that we have. And now that the weaknesses of the Articles have been exposed by Shays Rebellion, here in Philadelphia, we're going to meet up for the Constitutional Convention. Now, mind you, it's the middle of summer. And you see that small state house right there? All right. So, yes, this is a reunion of the bromances of the Revolution. Let's face it. People who were in the Second Continental Congress got an invite to this thing, right? A vast majority of them. There's a few notable names who are missing because John Adams, I think, is the diplomat for like the Netherlands at this time. Thomas Jefferson is the diplomat for France. So, some key dudes missing. However, I mean, largely, it's going to be the same old bromance. It's going to be, white males. Now they're middle-aged. They're a little bit older. They're still professional. They're still, wealthy as hell. And, yeah, these guys, the bromance is alive and well early on. But, as we said, look at this itty-bitty building. They are going to shut the doors. They're going to close the windows. It's going to be hot as freaking hell in there because it's July. These guys with their poofy wigs and their waistcoats and their breeches and everything dressed to the nines are going to be heated quite literally by the weather and heated emotionally because of politics, which they're very passionate about. So romances of the Revolution officially die during the Constitutional Convention, and what we have emerging as a result during this time is going to be two rival squads. Squad number one, the Federalists. These guys are going to be made up of people like George Washington, Alexander Hamilton, James Madison, Edmund Randolph, and John Jay. So these guys are in favor of a strong central government. They point to stuff like Shays Rebellion. They're like, yeah, we couldn't even squash this rebellion. We need something strong. We need to be organized. We see the need for the strong central government now. And stuff like separation of powers and checks and balances. So they wanted these three branches of government to exist and totally overhaul the Articles. They're like, yeah, this sucks. We need something new. So one thing, though, that they felt that we didn't need is a Bill of Rights. All right, let's hear this out now. So they felt that the strong central government that they were setting up should be able to protect the rights of the people in the future. So they're putting faith in the government to do that. Now, the Bill of Rights, they said, would limit what is protected because you can't possibly write down everything that's supposed to be protected. So therefore, they said, no, we're not even going to go there with a Bill of Rights. Okay? So the people who support the Federalists would be like your large landowners, your judges, lawyers, clergymen, merchants, creditors, and most of these people are going to be from New England. Most of them. There's a few Virginia sprinkled in there, notably Washington and Madison. But these guys are all hell-bent on pushing for the strong central government because they truly feel that you know, with all of this uncertain domestic security that occurred because of Shays Rebellion, the economic downturn, the unstable climate for investment, no trade in interstate commerce regulations. Foreign dignitaries must think we're nuts because we can't get our crap in order here. We need to, like, defend for the common defense. We need to have a stable currency. We need to settle interstate disputes and just, yeah, get it together. So the Federalists are really going to try to convince people to join their side and, you know, adopt the Constitution by passing such things as, by writing such things as the Federalist Papers. So we've got a series of essays written by the Federalists, which are James Madison, Alexander Hamilton, John Jay. They go through pseudonyms, okay? They don't use, like, their actual names. They use stuff like, I don't know, trying to think of a good one here. I'll have to get back to you on that. Yeah, it's 2 a.m. I'm having a brain fart. Sorry, guys. So, anyways, the Federalist Papers are written by these three. Alexander Hamilton writing the most, and then I think it's followed by James Madison and John Jay or something. So these series of essays are designed to try to convince people to, you know, support the revolution. Well, not the revolution, support the Constitution. There we go. So arguably the most important one is going to be Federalist 10. And this is where James Madison describes this whole notion of factions and his concern about factions. So remember that example I just gave you guys about how it's a bad idea to have just the teachers in charge of a school and how they would form factions based on their departments? See, that's kind of like what Madison's trying to talk about. He's like saying, hey, if you got a strong central government in charge, you won't have to worry about these factions, these groups forming, who are only in it for their own self-interest. So, in essence, I mean, yeah, you see the need for the strong central government. However, Squad number 2's got something to say in return. Squad 2 is the Anti-federalists. Now, these guys are made up of your extremely hardcore revolutionaries back in the day. You've got people like Samuel Adams, you know, John Hancock. Even though Thomas Jefferson's not present, he sure as hell knows what's going on. When he comes back home, man, he is going to be hardcore anti-federalist. Patrick Henry, as well, is not present for the Constitutional Convention because he kind of sees it as kind of shady. So, but back in Virginia, he's going to be advocating for the Anti-Federalists. Now, here's the thing with the Anti-Federalists. These dudes remember the Revolution. They remember Great Britain being a highly oppressive, strong central government. And they don't want that for their country. So, they think that the national government under the Constitution has too much power. And because there is no Bill of Rights included, they're extra paranoid about this going wrong. They're like, yeah, we know what's up with natural rights. When we're running the country in our lifetime, we're cool with that. We know how to not infringe on rights, but what about governments in the future? What if we get some president in the future who wants to, like, take away power? And that's another thing. They think the executive branch is too powerful because, yeah, the president is commander-in-chief of the army that they are also, like, freaking paranoid over because the Constitution and the Federalists are pushing for having a peacetime army. They've seen what's going on in Europe, and they're like, you know what? There's been so many times where European countries, their governments seize control of the military and use it to oppress the people. So no, hell no. We are not about this. We're not about a strong executive branch. We're not about a peacetime army. We are not about a strong national government because, especially since there's no Bill of Rights, and then Alexander Hamilton throwing shady crap like, ooh, necessary and proper clause. Basically, read in between the lines and interpret what the Constitution says. No, These guys are strict constructionists, the Anti-Federalists. These guys are more like, hey, it needs to be written down for them to follow it. They want no deviation of the sort, nothing up for interpretation. They want it in plain black and white print, what their rights are and what the powers of government are. None of this crap like, oh yeah, it's up for interpretation. So, the Anti-Federalists are going to be hell-bent on their side, in particular with the Bill of Rights especially. Because, like I said, they don't trust that strong central government. They don't think that in the future the people will be protected. And I mean, we see some of this contention as well with states like Rhode Island. Rhode Island decides not to even attend this convention. They're like, no, we're not going to send delegates to this convention. We see what it is. You know, we're very anti-federalist here, and we see you guys trying to get rid of our governing document. They didn't feel like they needed to get rid of the Articles completely. They felt that, yeah, it needs to be amended, but, you know, no. Just not like that. And Patrick Henry has a great quote for the Constitutional Convention. He's like, yeah, smelt a rat in Philadelphia tending toward the monarchy. This guy is like calling it how he sees it. He's like, yeah, you guys are just wanting to form another monarchy here. I mean, it doesn't help when people like Alexander Hamilton are saying, yeah, we should have a king. No, dude. No. But anyways, okay, those are our two squads. The squads are going to fight. They're going to fight several times. So, one big fight during the Constitutional Convention is going to be amongst big states and small states. So, round one. It's going to be Virginia plan versus the New Jersey plan. So here goes nothing. When they're drafting Article 1, the very first part of the Constitution, mind you, New Jersey and Virginia are going to butt heads over this. And here's why. Virginia comes up with a plan. It's written by James Madison and Edmund Randolph. And here's what they come up with. They're like, okay, guys, check this out. How about we have 3 branches of government? We got a legislative branch, we got an executive, we got a judicial branch. Okay? Cool. Point number 2. Within the legislative branch, we got a bicameral legislature, which means we have a House of Representatives and a Senate. All right. Point number 3. This is going to be the one that is highly contested. How we determine representation in Congress is going to be based solely on population. Okay, hold the phone here. Now, New Jersey's got something to say about that, because in essence, if you base representation on population, that helps the large states, like Virginia. But New Jersey's like, whoa, hold up. William Patterson here is like, hold up, dude. Nah. The articles need to be amended. Yeah. Let's go ahead and amend them. Let's give Congress more powers, like power to tax, regulate trade, make treaties, make Congress strong. However, let's keep this whole 1 vote per state thing pretty simple. 1 vote per state, done. We're good. So, he's also saying, yeah, there's a need for a federal executive branch, but we're not going to give them veto power, and there's a need for like a Supreme Court, right, to settle some disputes. But yeah, this whole thing about basing representation on population, bull, we don't buy that. So both sides are ready to walk out on this thing. I mean, poofy wigs are literally flying. People are getting heated. Country's going to fall apart. Okay, until we compromise. So, leave it up to Connecticut. Connecticut holds things together. We got Roger Sherman, Oliver Ellsworth, and even though he's not for Connecticut, he sprinkles in a little bit of influence here, Benjamin Franklin. So here's what they come up with this great compromise. Essentially, 3 branches of government, okay? So, legislative, executive, judicial. Within the legislative branch, we're going to have 2 houses of Congress, the House of Representatives and the Senate. So, here's where we get to the big compromise now. Large states, we hear you on the population thing. How about this? How about the lower house of Congress, the one that has the taxing authority? We're going to have them based on population. So large states are like, okay, cool, we're good. Small states, we haven't forgotten about you yet. All right, here's the deal. Now for you guys, you get the upper house of Congress. You get the Senate, where those dudes serve a lot longer anyways. They have the power to declare war and make treaties. And each state is going to get an equal amount of representation there. 2 senators per state. So therefore 2 votes per state. Small states are happy now with this. We add in some checks and balances, separation of powers and whatnot, and giving the federal government the ultimate authority with the cooperation of the states, a la federalism, and there you go. That is the great compromise. That essentially is, the bulk of the Constitution. However, now we run into fight number 2. Who counts as population for representation purposes? So, in comes the 3/5 compromise. It was being debated. Northern states and southern states could not agree on how slaves would be represented. So, Benjamin Harrison in Virginia is being like, hey, why don't you count him as half a person? Other representatives in northern states are like, you know what, 3/4. James Madison and Alexander Hamilton are going to be like, hey, how about 3/5? So, what we ultimately decide on is 3/5. So, our 3/5 compromise works like this. For every 5 slaves, 3 count for population purposes. So when we apply this rule here, if we're just going on free population in southern states in 1793, they would only have 33 seats in, Congress, in the House of Representatives. Now, when we add the 3/5 rule to that, you see that number jump up drastically to 47. So, in essence, southern states are going to benefit from this weird ass rule. Why don't you just count slaves as like whole people? Come on now, they're people, and probably should get rid of slavery during this, but they don't. They don't touch it because again, we don't want to alienate the southern states, so that's why the slavery issue is kind of off the table. All right, so fight number 3 occurs amongst Federalists and Anti-federalists over the ratification of the Constitution. Now, mind you, there's no Bill of Rights attached to this thing, so yeah, Anti-federalists are freaking heated about it. They are not about adopting this Constitution. That's why it takes so long for them to make this thing official, and that's why we see this political cartoon here, which is basically our version of the join or die snake, but for the Constitution. You see how the pillars are falling and crumbling. Rhode Island up there on top has already almost freaking fell, but it has a good foundation. It may be saved. North Carolina looks like the hand of God's reaching out trying to stop it from falling, and we also see others, Massachusetts being picked up, Virginia being picked up, so essentially, they're trying to say, hey, ratify this Constitution, keep this country strong, keep this country united and together. So, it's going to come down to another compromise. Okay, Anti-federalists are not giving in. So, James Madison, a strong Federalist, remember? He's going to step up. He's going to be like, okay, Anti-federalists, we hear you. Here you go. Here's your Bill of Rights. So he writes down the first 10 amendments, and so they're going to be drafted in 1789. By 1791, it's all said and done. Constitution, done. We're approving it, and we have our first 10 amendments to the Constitution, including our First Amendment, which is the 5 freedoms: freedom of religion, press, speech, assembly, and petition. We also have the right to bear arms as a 2nd Amendment. No quartering of soldiers in peacetime is the 3rd. No unreasonable searches and seizures is the fourth. The fifth one, we protect the rights of the accused by ensuring due process and whatnot. Okay, the sixth one, the right to a speedy and public trial by a jury of your peers. 7, trial by jury in civil suits. 8, no excessive fines or bails or cruel and unusual punishment. 9, powers are reserved to the people. And 10, powers are reserved to the states. So, do you guys see the influence from the Revolution in here? Come on now, let's think. Okay, number 1, First Amendment. Free speech was limited in the colonies, as well as the right to assemble and petition. Remember, colonial legislatures would be done away with. So that is directly a result of some of the revolutionary grievances. Same with the Second Amendment. I mean, well-regulated militias needed weapons. And that's what they're trying to say in the Second Amendment, right? Well-regulated militia has the right to bear arms, of course, for one's defense and whatnot. So, again, very reactionary to the Revolution. And same with number 3. That one's reactionary to the Quartering Act, right? When people were forced to keep soldiers in their home. Number 4, writs of assistance. People were being searched with blank search warrants. Their homes, their properties, whatnot, for contraband. So we don't want that happening in the United States, so therefore, the Fourth Amendment, our right to privacy, essentially. Fifth and Sixth Amendment go hand in hand because, the rights of the accused are being trampled on in the colonies leading up to the Revolution. People were being transported overseas for trials that should have been held by a jury of their peers back at home. And, with number 8, excessive fines and bails and cruel and unusual punishment. Yeah, that was happening here in the colonies. People were paying outrageous fines and bails. So, definitely, that is reactionary to what was going on in the Revolution. And then I especially like number 9 and number 10. Power reserved to the people and power reserved to the states. I love that these two are like the catch-all, pretty much, for future rights. It's like saying, hey, we haven't thought of it yet, but that doesn't mean you don't have that right. You can always reserve that right to yourselves and to the states. So essentially, these are our Bill of Rights. And ultimately, what the weaknesses the Articles have, the Constitution addresses them. So the Constitution is going to have a strong central government, something we severely lacked under the Articles. It's also going to have an electoral college to go ahead and decide on how to, vote for the president and select the president. We'll get more into the electoral college with government, but just know that it's not based on, it's not like popular vote elects the president, it's the electoral college. So based on whoever carries the popular vote in each state has a number of electors, and the electors will usually, 9 times out of 10, go to the person who wins the majority of the votes in the state. So there are some states that do it proportionally, like Maine, based on the election results for their state, but others will usually go with whoever wins 51% of the vote in their state gets all of those states' electors. So, like I said, guys, you'll cover it more in depth with your government classes, but just for our intents and purposes, that's how it rolls. Okay, and the founding fathers wanted to do this because ye of little faith of the common man back then. So we've got our separation of powers. We've got the 3 branches of government. Our executive that enforces the laws, our legislative that makes the laws, our judicial that interprets the laws. Plus, we have a system of checks and balances to where one branch cannot be more powerful than the other. There's going to be certain checks put in place to essentially limit the power of that opposing branch. So, for example, the judicial branch has the power to declare legislation unconstitutional. As we will find out later, after the ruling of Marbury versus Madison, which establishes judicial review. Let's come up with another example, okay? The legislative branch has impeachment powers, right, over the executive and over the judicial. The executive branch has veto powers over the legislative. So, you see, they kind of like check on one another. Now, we also have Congress with ultimate authority now, like the power to tax, regulate trade, enforce laws that it did not have under the Articles. Also, we get to coin our own money now. We have a national currency instead of like every state coining their own money and causing like chaos and confusion. So this is going to stabilize our currency and our economy as well. We have two houses of Congress. We have the House of Representatives, which is based on the state's population, and we have the Senate, which is, well, equal representation for the states. Plus, you know, when the Articles are considered a firm league of friendship, the Constitution is going to establish that more perfect union. So, essentially, yeah, here's your AP tip for the day, guys. This is usually 9 times out of 10 what they're going to ask you guys about for this particular topic. They will always ask you to compare and contrast the Articles of Confederation and the Constitution, and how you do that easily is by going with the weaknesses of the Articles and how they're addressed as strengths within the Constitution. So, yeah, usually this shows up as like a LEQ for you guys or a DBQ. Perhaps a short answer as well. It's usually written, okay? So keep that in mind, guys. And, all right, we've gone on long enough with this topic, so let's go ahead and wrap this up. I will catch you guys later when I discuss George Washington's presidency and John Adams's presidency in our early republic. So, all right, guys, take care, and I will catch you later.